Hello and welcome once again to one of the Modernise webinars that's being presented this week by Embarcadero, and various people are taking part, including some Embarcadero employees like Marco Cantu, which hopefully you caught his presentation yesterday. Very, very good. And also some people like myself who are Embarcadero MVPs. There's already been quite a few sessions so far, and there's some more coming up as well in the next few weeks. We're trying to make sure that we're all talking about something different and that we're not all trying to repeat the same things over and over again. There is some crossover because obviously we're talking about Windows 10 specifically, and that's kind of one operating system rather than talking about Linux and iOS and Android, which are all the things that Delphi can do. Our specific aim with this particular webinar today, and some of the others as well, is Delphi 10.3, which is also called Rio, Delphi Rio. It's available sort of far and wide. And today's presentation are some top Windows 10 features that you can add to your VCL applications. Now, we are talking specifically today about VCL applications, but you can also use FireMonkey, and many of those things work in FireMonkey as well. In fact, I think nearly all of them work in FireMonkey. The two technologies between VCL and FireMonkey are quite different. Many of the controls that you use in FireMonkey have different properties, for example. And you can do some very cool things with FireMonkey. My advice would be that going forwards, if you're writing new apps, really look at FireMonkey if you haven't already, if you haven't taken that jump, because when you do start coding apps in FireMonkey, all sorts of exciting things can happen. And of course, you get the added advantage that you can go multi-platform as well. So you can start having targeting things like Mac OS and Linux now with the new Linux controls that became available recently with the recent update, and of course iOS and Android. Is getting pretty exciting, really. I think Delphi's never been quite a sort of a prolific tool as it's becoming. I tell people that Delphi is my superpower, and I'm not kidding. It really is. It's my superpower to getting lots and lots of apps written with really minimal coding manpower, or employee power is probably a better way of putting it. Delphi apps I've got out there have been running for many, many years, and they run and they keep running, and they don't crash, they don't do weird things, they don't need lots of .NET updates and stuff like that. Delphi is a single package, one executable, and off you go in most cases. Very few dependencies, unlike a lot of other systems you might find out there. We're going to look today at some RAD Studio and Delphi features you can take advantage of today to make your existing and new apps look, feel, and behave more like modern Windows 10 applications. If you think about Windows 10 application, the trend is to flatten things down, to have a lot more visual simplicity, but power, shall we say, in the applications. And that's new compared to maybe the old way of doing things, where there was a lot of more skeuomorphism, for example, in Windows XP applications, and certainly Windows 7 started that trend towards simplifying things, and then they lost their way a little bit with Windows 8, where they tried to make Windows be a tablet operating system and a phone operating system, and also some kind of weird almost desktop operating system. And luckily, things calmed down, and Windows 10 became the de facto standard, and that is the only operating system version available now for Windows going forwards. If you take a Delphi 7 app, for example, it will still run absolutely fine under Windows 10, but it looks like a Delphi 7 app that's running under Windows 10. What we're going to try and do today is talk about some controls that you can add to those apps, maybe the existing Delphi 7 apps, or new application frameworks that you can start to use to get a flying start into looking like a Windows 10 app that belongs, shall we say. If you haven't got the latest version of RAD Studio, then I would suggest that if you fall into the criteria, you should definitely look at the Community Edition. This is a free edition. There are restrictions on what you can have, but if you're new to Delphi or you are a hobbyist, shall we say, rather than professional developer, then the Community Edition is really the thing to go with. Almost everything you see in this webinar today, and probably most of this week, last week, and probably the next few weeks, can be done with the Community Edition. The Community Edition is basically the equivalent of the professional version of RAD Studio. The SKU, shall we call it, the stock keeping unit or product number, is the same thing essentially behind the scenes. And that means that with the Community Edition, you can not only do the kind of Windows 10 things we're doing now, but also produce mobile applications for iOS and Android. If you're not a professional developer, then really, there is absolutely no excuse not to use the Community Edition to learn how to program and see if this is what you want to be doing going forwards into the future. Because, I remember the day I decided to become a computer programmer. I was 14 years old. I was in a very boring physics lesson, and I saw this guy using what in those days was a very old-fashioned computer. And he just typed a load of stuff on the screen, and I thought, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen. I really want to do that as a job. And you know what? 35 years later, I'm still doing that job, and I never look back. So if you're thinking about getting into a career as a developer, don't listen to all the naysayers that may be out there saying, you need to do this, you need to do Python, you need to do that. Stick with us. Try Delphi. If you don't like it, that's fine if it's not for you. But if you do try Delphi, this can do absolutely everything you want. You could be writing Windows 10 apps right now, and you could be writing iOS and Android apps right now and learning all of this for free. If you are a professional developer and you may be using an older version of Delphi, say 2009, I know it's very popular. Lots of people still use Delphi 7, struggling along with it. It's a very solid IDE. There are trial versions available for Delphi, so you can try this out. You can look at the versions that we've got. You really need to be thinking about going towards Rio. I know it costs money, but if you factor into that the kind of salary that you can earn and professional income that you can build up over time, it's worth it, And the way that the product's available now is with software support or update subscription, I think it's called, isn't it? It's the Embarcadero term for it. So you've always got the latest version, and all the bugs are fixed if there are any. If a new version of iOS comes out that does things differently, then the app is there to do it. What kind of features are there in Delphi 10.3? Well, there are a number of absolutely gorgeous new themes and templates, both for VCL and probably almost double that for FireMonkey as well, because FireMonkey is much more graphical in the way you can do things. So you can do all sorts of bizarre animations and stuff like that. But there are quite a few themes cropping up now for the VCL. All of them are free. They're not chargeable, although there are some systems out there that also provide custom Delphi themes that you can pay for, but the ones that are available via Getit are free. Getit is the package manager that's built into Delphi. You go into Tools and Getit and look for themes, and there's lots and lots of them there. There's also several built-in, which I'm going to show you in the applications. There's also a deluge of new Windows 10 APIs. Microsoft are on a bit of a roll at the moment. They're doing things like putting Linux into the Windows operating system using the WSL, and WSL 2 is coming out, Windows System for Linux. A new terminal that's going to have tabs on it, and as they do that, and as they open source almost everything, because basically it's not the old Microsoft of days gone by, but a brand new let's go around and be very nice to everybody kind of Microsoft. They keep adding new APIs at a massive rate of knots. Now, I was told earlier on today that as of January, they'd caught up with all the possible APIs that were converted into Delphi. But since then, of course, Microsoft have released some more because they've got 20,000 programmers or whatever. But we do keep trying to catch up. There are some specific VCL components that target Windows 10 features and capabilities, and I'm going to show you these later in a little bit of a product demo, shall we say, and mainly going through samples and describing what the samples do and stuff like that. And you can also package your app using the new Apex packaging format. Now, if you are familiar with development, and I'm sure you are, because otherwise you wouldn't be here listening to this webinar, there is obviously used to be back in the day a .com format, which was just a binary image that was loaded into memory, and that's how your program ran. It was literally as simple as it could get. And then the .exe format came out, and that had relocatable sections and memory management and all sorts of exciting things like that. And the new kid on the block is Apex. And an Apex packaging format is the thing that Windows 10 uses to allow your apps to be deployed as little chunks, shall we say, of application, almost like a zip file. In fact, I think they are actually some form of zip file. When you install an Apex application, it goes into a very specific place in Windows, and it lives in that area, and it's not like the old days of your application going to program files or something like that, and you having to write an installer, using something like Jordan's installer or something like that, or install builder, or all the other ones that came along after that. It's a very specific type of packaging. The Apex is also the thing that's used for Windows Store support, and that's actually quite important because the way that they deliver apps from Windows Store is to stream them down as an Apex, and then if you uninstall it, it streams the thing out by basically deleting the folder that it's sitting in. The other thing that comes in the latest version of Delphi is 64-bit Windows support. Now, you might say, well, why is that important? It's important because obviously up until 5 years ago or something like that, lots of people are still running 32-bit versions of Windows. Most versions of Windows now on newer laptops and newer hardware, most people are going to laptops rather than desktops, tend to be running a 64-bit version of Windows. However, that version of Windows might be 64-bit, but it can still run 32-bit applications. They work fine, and they do have some slight issues because they have to go in a specific program folder. But with a 64-bit app, you can address a lot more memory, and for bigger applications, let's say doing statistical analysis or something like that, 64 bits is important. It's actually important from an operating system point of view, because with Windows 2019, there are plenty of customers that I've bumped into recently who are actually only wanting to install new products that are 64 bits only. It does restrict them down, obviously, but if they're corporates, for example, we've got some police forces that use my program and a couple of hospitals, they want to have a nice super efficient environment, and so they say, nope, we're only going to run 64-bit apps. I'm sure they let a few 32-bit things sneak in because, there's a lot of people out there that haven't done it, but you will bump into more and more people that say, your app's got to be 64-bit or we don't want to know. And the other thing that this Delphi 10.3 can do is to support something that is called high-res DPI support and Per Monitor V2. Now, what does that mean? Well, essentially, if you think when you go to an office nowadays, you tend to see people with at least 2 monitors. Not always. I mean, there are plenty of people out there a few years behind and they've got the 1 monitor. But even people that've got a laptop tend to have a second screen somewhere. And yeah, sometimes they turn their laptop panel off, but a lot of the time they're using the second screen as well, as giving them more real estate. And more customers, when you go to them, they've got at least 2 screens on their desktop because it's cool. I've got 3, and then sometimes I have 4 because I'm a weirdo. And those different screens in the old days used to be matched. You used to have the same resolution, so it'd be 1920 by 1080 on one screen and 1920 by 1080 on the other screen. But nowadays, with the latest versions of Windows, which I think came up in the Windows 10 anniversary update, you now can have different resolutions on different screens, and not just the different resolutions, but different dots per inch. And what that means is that you can scale your desktop so that the fonts look the same size, but actually one of those screens could have 96 dots per inch, and the other screen could be doing 120 dots per inch or something random like that. I'm not going to put, talking off the top of my head, but that kind of thing, which is great. But as soon as you move your app, you drag your app from one screen to another, it looks horrible. If you've ever done that with an older version of Delphi or even Visual C++ or something like that. With Per Monitor V2 support, we actually find that when you drag the apps around, that they will scale properly. It's actually extremely useful. Now, if we just talk about the first couple of things, the Windows 64-bit support. In order to support Windows 64-bit, as long as you're using an operating system of your own with Delphi installed on it that's 64-bit, then you can simply add the platform for the 64-bit and off you go. It's as simple as that. If you're using a 32-bit operating system, so Windows 32-bit, then you actually need to use the PA server, which is a platform assistant, in the same way that you would do with iOS or Android. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of this because it's a little bit too complicated for this little webinar at the moment. But really, all you need to do is you go down to the project properties, right-click on targets, say Add Platform, select Windows 64-bit, and as long as you've got components that also work on 64-bit, and nearly all of them do, that's it. You can create a 64-bit executable. You hit build, you select deploy, and out comes one 32-bit application if that's what you're doing, and one 64-bit application when you deploy that as well. Simple as that. It couldn't be easier. There aren't really any considerations that you have to have for 64-bit in that sense. High-res DPI and Per Monitor V2. Well, I already explained what that was that you could have 2 screens, maybe a laptop and then a second screen, and they're almost certainly going to have different resolutions, particularly if you've got something like a Mac and then you're running a virtual machine on another screen or something like that. In the old days, yes, it did look pretty awful. That's just the way it worked out. Now you can actually enable it by going into Project, selecting Options, going down to Manifest, which you can see on the screen there with the arrows, and then click on the Per Monitor V2. That's actually enabled by default, so really 9 times out of 10 you're probably not going to need to do anything much further than that. Now, Marco did talk about Per Monitor V2 in his presentation in much more depth, so I'm going to kind of skirt over that, but it's just important you know that this is one of the things you can do for Windows 10 because it's a specific Windows 10 feature, and I'm sure it's going to get more and more important as it goes. Whilst we're on this particular screen, if you look underneath the arrow that says Per Monitor V2, there's a thing that says execution level as Invoker. you can actually change that to say things like administrator or highest available. What that does is if your program is called by something else and it's a normal user, you might want your program to actually run as an administrator because it's going to do something that requires administrator permissions. In order to do that, you can click on that execution level and select as administrator, and off it goes. It will go off and say pling, and it will put a little bit in the manifest file that causes Windows to show that little dialog box and says this program needs elevation. So another feature. It's not really a Windows 10 feature as such, but it is a kind of, I think it was Windows 7 onwards, and it's a fairly important thing. What else? I think that's all we need to worry about on that thing. Another feature. Packages and Apex. Well, again, whilst we're still in the properties, if we go down to the section that says deployment and provisioning,
welcome once again to
there is a section there where we can say we're going to target the Windows application store. If you don't know what the App Store is, then you might not be alone in that, because actually quite a lot of people, for some reason, don't realise that Windows 10 has got an application store. I don't know quite how they managed to miss it, because Microsoft do try and make a big thing of it, but there you go. But the application store is just like, you know, iOS or Android Google Play Store, and you can go into the application store and search for an application. Let's say you want an application to, I don't know, determine diets or something like that. What kind of fruit is highly calorific? The short answer before you look for it is none of it really. But let's say that that's what you want to do. You go into the application store, type in a few keywords, and the apps will be displayed. Well, if you package your apps up and apply to Microsoft for a account for that, which it's not a lot. I can't remember how much it was, but it's like less than $99. I'm not sure what it would be in other currencies, but unlike iOS, where you pay with Apple, you pay that fee every year. With Microsoft, you pay that fee once, and then you never have to pay that fee again. And all they really do is just validate that you are some real human and not some kind of horrible hacker sitting out in the wilds of the mountains somewhere trying to steal money off of people. And they will then issue you with an account, and then you can start getting paid for your applications. There are a lot of restrictions on what you have to do, and I'm not going to go into how to actually register with the application store. The main thing on this screen that people might not understand are, first of all, if you choose application store and say distribution ad hoc, what you're saying there is that you want to create a package that's like an application store package, but it can be given to other people without going through the App Store. And what this will do is it'll take your application, let's say your application is called My Application, and it will package it up into myapplication.appx. Okay? And when you distribute that to your customers, either on a CD, if you're still using such things, or a thumb drive, USB drive, or from a link on a web page or some other format, what happens is that package will then run as an installer. It's got a certificate file in it that's signed to say who you are, and when they go to install it, it'll say this is an application from John Smith or Ian Barker or whoever, and do you want to install it? When they say yes, it installs just like a normal installer. Now, the certificate file is the thing that throws a few people off. Okay, I sign all my applications with a code signing certificate. What a code signing certificate does is it identifies me through a certificate authority, and there are a few of them around. VeriSign are one of them. The big one is Komodo. And what this does is you have to go through a validation process. They check who you are, and they really do check. I actually had to go to a notary and take some information to prove who I was. But if you're a limited company in the UK, or if you're LLC or something like that in the US, or similar legal entities in other countries, it's a lot easier. You can send various proof that your company exists. They can actually validate a lot of it on the web with publicly available information. But what they will do is they'll validate you, and then they will send you a certificate file that contains encrypted information that identifies you uniquely. You can then sign your application, and you know when you run an application and it's not signed, it comes up with a little yellow box, warning, and says this is from an unknown publisher. Well, if you sign your apps with a code signing certificate, or you package them in the application store ad hoc format with a certificate, then when it runs under Windows 10 and also Windows 8 and 7, it will come up and say it's a known publisher. It's a different color. I think it's blue. It's a much more pleasing, relaxing sound that comes out rather than a warning, or you're unrecognized. And the information in that certificate is available to people to check. My advice is, if you do want to do that, I'd recommend a company called ksoftware.net. We can put the links up later. They're the people I found to be the cheapest anyway. I have no link to them, by the way. I don't get any kickback from them. I'm an Embarcadero MVP, and so I like Embarcadero, but anybody else, they have no link with me. I don't get any advantages from them at all. But ksoftware.net, I found them to be the cheapest and the most reliable. I've used them for about 5 years now for a couple of companies that I work for. But that will give you a certificate file so you can sign it. Again, Marco did talk about this in a different webinar, I think. Now, in Delphi 10.3, there are a number of specific components for Windows 10. If you go down to the palette, you will see a Windows 10 specific category, shall we say, and in that category are the following bits and bobs. So there's the T Windows Store, T Activity Indicator, Toggle Switch, blah, 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 blah. I'm sure you can read all of these. Some of these have existed for a while, but they are tuned to or more pertinent to Windows 10. Particularly things like the split view. The split view, if you think of most modern Windows 10's apps, you can think of them as they tend to have a little bar down the left-hand side, which has got some pretty icons on. And if you click on those icons, different application pages appear. And if you click on them, you can have a hamburger menu, as it's called, the lines across them and things like that. That is a very common paradigm of user interface paradigm for Windows 10, and so the split view is that. It's the equivalent of the thing that you get in FireMonkey for the T multi-view component, which confuses me quite a lot, by the way, incidentally. We're not immune to these things as MVPs, but split view seems to be a little bit easier to use for me. I understand what it's doing, whereas my multi-view, I sometimes get myself in a bit of a mess. But all of these components here, they're all specifically tuned for Windows 10. I think there's 14 of them there or something like that. T card panel, which I'm going to show you a demo of in a moment, is another one that's particularly useful. In the old days, you used to have a Windows 3.1 category, as you see down on the left there, and in there was a thing called a T notebook. And I don't know about you, but I used to use those all the time. Some people used to use T-Tab Notebook. It still exists. Both those components are still in Delphi 10.3. But the old user interface paradigm was to have pages that change because you had buttons somewhere across the top, like maybe, I don't know, a Microsoft Word ribbon type thing, or perhaps tabbed notebook, so you'd have lots and lots of tabs. And those tabs have gone away in Windows 10. and the T-split view really does take over from there, and then works if you use it in conjunction with T-card panel. You can then have multiple pages of things happening on your app. The card panel, if you add gestures and things like that, you can do all sorts of exciting things like swipe to support touch, for example, or mouse gestures. I don't really like mouse gestures because they always remind me of Don Norman's description of a Norman door, where you go up to a door and you can't tell what to do with the door because it's just a door and doesn't have a handle. Do you push it? Do you pull it because it's got a hidden door handle somewhere, a clip? And I think that swipe gestures tend to be a little bit like that. You have to work out how to use it rather than have an obvious kind of affordance, as they call it in UI circles. Anyway, so these components are specific to Windows 10. And there's some more. Yes, there are a lot of them that are quite specific really to Windows 10. The ones that are probably more and more relevant are things like the Bluetooth components. The Bluetooth components are becoming more and more popular, especially Bluetooth low energy. There's a lot more devices now that work on Bluetooth low energy. And in fact, if you think, I don't know whether it's true in other countries, but certainly in the United States, motor insurers give you a little key, a little box that you put inside your car, and it's a Bluetooth low energy beacon. You then have an app on your phone, and you link your phone up to this Bluetooth beacon, and then as you drive around, it uses your phone's accelerometer to work out if you're speeding and braking very fast and going around corners on two wheels. You can do the same thing with your apps as well, and you can also do those with desktop apps as well. So there are some Bluetooth low energy things that work, like I forget, someone was showing me a blood sugar monitor the other day that they linked up using Bluetooth low energy. So they're more relevant. Bluetooth stacks are still a little bit shaky, even under Windows 10, but they're very useful things. And of course, standard Bluetooth is used for communications, headsets, and things like that. Now, the other one that's hidden very sneakily in this system thing, and I think personally should be in the Windows 10 section, but there you go, is Notification Center. Now, the alerts that pop up in Windows when something happens, like you get new mail or there's a new update, or you unplugged a headphone or something and it pops up, and it's called Toast because it literally pops up like a toaster. They are quite specific to the operating system. With Windows 10, they're reasonably basic. They tend to show a little bit of text, maybe an icon, and then they hide in the notification center down on the right. If you click on that notification, you can then deeply link into the app, and the notification center handles all that. Marco, in his API thing, showed a complicated way to do it using lots of code. I'm not as clever as him, and so I use things like the components. It's cross-platform. It works on Windows 8 and Windows 10, but not Windows 7. So it's fairly easy to do. I'm going to show you that in a minute. Sharing contract is the other one, which is also hidden down the bottom there. The sharing contract, it's a bit convoluted, I think. Let's say that you have a medical records program that you work on. I know that's at least one person listening today who writes medical records, and you want to be able to share those medical records out to other applications or out to parts of the operating system. I don't know, your mail program or something like that. The sharing contract component allows you to do that more easily. Sharing sharing contracts are actually quite difficult. I've got a link there on the slide. If you go to there, it explains all about how sharing contracts work and what you're supposed to do, and it's many pages of information. I'm not going to show you a demo for this because I don't fully understand all the nuances of it and can't really show you it in a short period of time, but it's another one that really is a Windows 10 specific component, because it was around in 8, but I don't think it was around in 7. Windows 7. So there you go. And the other real beautiful thing that you can immediately put in your app, if you have a Delphi 7 app and you are lucky enough to have all the third-party components that you may have used.
Many of customers that I've bumped into recently who are actually only wanting to.
If you open your app, it will probably open first time and work in Delphi 10.3. The reason I say that is I've just converted in probably last year a fairly large app that was Delphi 7 with 10, I forget how, 1 million something lines of code. We did have to do some work and it wasn't completely straightforward, but that was mainly through some choices we made with third-party components, and also some of the ways we did things were not very sensible for later, more modern versions of Delphi. But one thing we could do was immediately go to the section that says project properties, select appearance, and then say custom styles. Okay, and if I go down there and tick all those like that, what will happen is, and I can choose default style, by the way, Windows 10 dark, as you can see in there. What will happen is all of a sudden your application has got the capability to be skinned or themed in various different colors. And some of these schemes are absolutely gorgeous. They will take your existing ugly Windows 95, 98 XP style app. I don't care how old it is. I've written plenty. I've been a Delphi programmer since Delphi 1, so there's apps out there that are really, really old and ugly, and I cringe when I see them. But if you take your old app and do nothing more to it, you don't add anything else, if you just add these custom styles, immediately it's going to be amazing. It's going to look great straight out of the box. It's really not difficult. Now, there are also, when creating new applications, some additional options. Okay, and when you select File, New Application, in fact, if you select File, New, and then Other, you'll go down, and if you select Windows, you'll see a number of different additional options in there. Okay, and these two extra options that you probably haven't had before are Windows VCL application and Windows Metropolis UI application. We're ignoring the FireMonkey for now, but these two applications types are the key ones that you're going to use. Blank VCL application is what you get if you use Windows VCL application. You have to do everything, but you can use all the components that I showed you. But if you choose Windows Metropolis UI application, really what you're going to get is a full screen application of one of three different types. Okay, and those three different types have got a lot of the groundwork done for you already to make your app look more modern. It's a personal preference whether you're going to like them. Okay, the three options that you get if you choose new VCL Metropolis UI application are blank application, grid application, and split pane. Now those applications are they're fairly tied to a Windows 10 look that might not necessarily be what you want. But they do have a good starting point for various things, and you can always edit what's going on. There's a gesture manager in there, so you can do things that swipe on tablets. My daughter, for example, is at the university studying Korean, and she uses a Surface Go, and she uses it because she has to write Korean letters. She's American, but she types in normal American English settings, but when she has to do her homework, she has to write it in Korean, and so she's using a pen and touch all the time. And of course, when she's using the app, she will actually use touch to use Microsoft Word and things like that. So don't underestimate people using gestures with mice and pens and those other things. But the blank application's got gesture manager. It's got an app bar, which is really just a repository, like a toolbar at the bottom. And the blank app has only got a close button. It's also got an action list because that's a good way to encapsulate functionality. It's very basic. The grid application is a bit more beautiful. It's got some panels and flow panels, which are some of the new components that you can use. It uses master detail UI idiom, and it's way more complete. And the split pane is the kind of thing that you expect to see for things like Spotify, for example, uses a similar kind of look. And various other applications that are trying to go to a modern look and feel. It's similar to the grid application above, but it's just got much more navigation with the master and detail. And of course, the other thing you get with Windows 10.3, with Delphi 10.3 or RAD Studio 10.3 is a ton of Windows 10 application API integration. It's pretty subtle. Because most of it is just using the Delphi language, and you don't realize that you're suddenly calling new APIs. And in fact, behind the scenes, if you ever look at the RTL source code, there's an awful lot of stuff in there that it says, oh, am I doing this on Windows 10, or am I doing this on Windows 7, or am I some other version of the operating system? And it adapts its behavior. There's a lot of dynamic library loading going on in the background. It's absolutely mind-blowing, really, some of the stuff that goes on. Very clever stuff. But look at Marco's presentation from yesterday, a tale of 3 APIs, which is all about that kind of thing. Anyway, what I think we'll do now is go hands-on with the IDE. And it's going to be a quick zip through because we are running short of time already. But let's have a look at a few of those options. Okay, well, we're here in Delphi, and this is Delphi 10.3 or RAD Studio 10.3. So it's the RAD Studio with Delphi personality in here. What we're going to do is just look at a few of the examples just so that you can see the kind of components that we're talking about and the sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Yes, the functionality that you can get from them. I showed you in the slides the fact that if you go into here, you can say select new, and then you can choose a VCL application, which is what you're all used to. But if you are not used to it, by the way, I have quite a few TMS components installed as well. So you see quite a lot of TMS turning up here. They're a third-party vendor, very, very good. Again, I have no link with them, but I do recommend using their stuff. They're a great company. So file new other, and then go down to Windows. And as I showed you in the slides, there's a VCL application, which is a blank VCL application, or Windows Metropolis UI application. Now, Metropolis is really it was introduced with Windows 8, and the idea was that it was going to be a kind of tablet operating system for desktops, which didn't really work. But there are some still good points about it. As mentioned before, that you could use FireMonkey, but if you choose the Metropolis UI application, then you'll get this wizard up. And there are 3 different types. The blank Metropolis UI application doesn't really do much at all. But if I just open it, I could probably show you it in a moment. Then there's a grid and the split pane, as I showed you before. Now, to save time, I've already got these working. Now, a lot of my fellow MVPs and presenters actually swap to white on black text for their presentation, but actually I prefer the dark mode, and I think it actually is just as visible. So if we just look for 1 second at what you've got on the app, there's not an awful lot here. There's a gesture manager and an action list, and down here is the toolbar. And in fact, if we go into the structure, there are the little bits and bobs that you've got on there. Okay, the app bar being at the bottom. Okay, and a close button. So if we select that, that close button's at the very bottom of here. You can't hardly see it. But if we hit F9, which will compile and run it, up will come our application. And any minute now, there's your blank application. And the gesture manager is allowing us that when I hit escape, like I have just now, that close button appears. Not exactly exciting, not very useful, I don't think, but that is actually a good start for some people, because they say, oh, well, cool. Hey, a full screen app, it does all the things I can want, and I can add extra things to my toolbar at the bottom. Not an awful lot of code in there. If you're familiar with action managers, then you'd understand that the way it works is you add new actions into the action manager in here, and then you assign them to buttons and various other things. What they're doing here is they are trapping the gesture, which is I think you swipe up or something like that. But the actual key that they trap as well is if I press the escape key, then the app bar will show or not show. It hides or unhides. Not that exciting, but that's what it does. So let's choose another one, which is a little bit more useful. And I think the one that looks pretty exciting, shall we say, is the Metro Split application. Okay, now you can see once again that there's not an awful lot of wonderfulness, I don't know what else we would call it, going on, but there are some forms. There's a detail form that's got these controls in it, and a master form, and just as before, there really isn't an awful lot of code going on in the background. Okay, there's some generic lorem ipsum text, which you'll be familiar with. It's just gibberish, that pseudo gibberish, should we say, and there's just a couple of little bits of code there to make some stuff happen when you click on things. It's really not that difficult, and in fact, for most novices, I reckon if you spent 2 minutes looking at the code, you'd soon work out how to use it. It's not that difficult at all to use. What does it look like? Well, when we run it, like so, again, up comes there. It's a tiled application. If I hit escape, the close button appears down here. But if I click on a detail item down there, up comes some information down here, and as you can see, you can't really see this text change because it's the same default text. But the idea is that you could have, say, a bunch of employees down here, or account details if it was an accounts package or something like that, and this would change. Demo that I suggest you look at is, by the way, you can find all the demos here. I should have mentioned that earlier on. So it goes into users, public documents, Embarcadero Studio 20, and then there's samples in here. And then if you go to Object Pascal and then VCL, all of the different versions of the demos that I'm showing you now are in here. You do actually have to install them as part of the installer. So when you go into install Delphi 10.3, you do need to click on the add samples. You can get them online as well, and we'll mention that link later. But if you've clicked on samples, then they're all there. You can go and find them. I'm sure you can watch this webinar later and see them. The one that I'd definitely recommend us both looking at right now is the split view demonstration. Okay, split view is the probably the most common application paradigm that you see nowadays. Okay, and I'm just going to minimize this so that it's a bit clearer as to what's going on. The split view is this control here. Okay, and if you if we just say compact, you'll have seen this user metaphor before. Microsoft use it a lot, and in fact it's almost used everywhere you can think, like down here, for example. And what this version here does is, this is just an image, okay, with a click on it, and it's really just running methods of this control, the split view control. And this application has only got this one panel on, but the way I would tend to use it is that I would use these icons down here, and then if you do this, you can see what they are. And then as you chose the different buttons here, in here I would have a card view, which is like the old notebooks. And then as you select each of these, the card view page is changed. And I'm going to show you the card view in a minute, but if you see this first, when you see the card view, you'll understand what I'm talking about. There are different properties that you can set for this split view. Some of them not as useful or common. Like, for example, I don't like that one. Most people have this, where it's docked. Okay. The other thing is, don't tend to put it on the right either. Most people have it on the left. That's the most common user interface setup. Now, whilst we're in here, we'll also notice this. If I go into here, you'll notice there's some little VCL styles here. You remember I showed you that massive, great big list? Well, if we choose dark mode, bing! Oh, look, the application suddenly turned into dark mode. You can do this. You can grab your Delphi 7 or Delphi 2009 programs and click on those VCL styles, add them, and your application can do this. And look, there's absolutely nothing you need to do to make it look cool. You can make this. This already looks like a Delphi, like a Windows 10 application, just literally out of the box like that. I mean, there are a lot of different styles available, but the default ones are pretty good just as they are. Iceberg Classic, I don't even remember that. Oh yeah, see, this is more like a Macintosh style, Linux should I say. This is more like a Linux kind of look and feel, and so you can change quite a lot of look and feel about it. This bar doesn't work very well, but there you go, can't have everything. But this to me looks like something from Ubuntu at the moment. Which if you've used Ubuntu, you'd know exactly what I'm talking about. And then the default Windows 10 version is this. Now, there is a piece of code that you can run. You can check, it's not documented very well, but you can check a registry setting and find out what the default setting is. You'll notice my desktop is running in dark mode. I prefer dark mode, and in fact, I have got a good reason for running dark mode. I get photos in my eyes. Through age and having bad eyesight, and when I'm coding, I prefer dark mode because I can't see the floaters. It's as simple as that, and my vision's actually better. So people that say, "Oh, it's just trendy, oh, dark mode," no, actually, for people with visual issues, I'm not blind or anything, but it's just annoying to have a floater in your eye. Dark mode really works for me. It's weird because I started coding in 1982, I think. And at that point, all the monitors were black with either green or amber text. So it's really funny to see everybody gravitating back towards black backgrounds. It's hilarious, really. They obviously knew a thing or two back in those days. But anyway, this is split view. It's absolutely brilliant. Very, very useful. Right, so what else have we got? Yes, the last thing that I'm running out of time, in fact, I'm running over time. The two other things I'd like to show you. The first one is the card panel, okay? And the card panel looks like, looks like this. Okay, and you've got some pages in the card panel. And really, the properties for it are fairly straightforward. So if I select this, oh dear, not fitting very well on my screen, but you've got, hang on, what is going on? This, yes. You've got some default pages, a page index property, just like the old notebook. I personally feel that this is T-Notebook, but redone for the modern age. It supports not an awful lot more than what used to happen before. It is styled, but really the idea is that when you run your Windows 10 application, with that split view that I showed you before, if you drop this panel, card panel on the middle part of your app, you'll see that I can do this. I'm actually dragging right and left, but you can also select next card and so on and so forth. So the way you do the next page is literally next card. Not difficult at all. There, click on next card. Now, whilst we're here, let's just go to the project options and remind ourselves of how we get this VCL style bit to work. So we go down to appearance on there, and all we need to do is just tick the ones that we want to support. So carbon and iceberg, classico, and all the rest of it. Okay. And what's being done in this demo app, and once again, you can get this demo app, it's fairly easy to do, is when it creates the form, it's got a combo box on there, which is just here, and it cycles through a thing called T-Style Manager, gets all the style names and puts them into that combo box. Then when you click on the combo box, all it does is use the T-Style Manager to set the style using the name that's in there. Absolutely genius piece of code, very, very simple. If you also read the registry, as I said before, you can actually get the registry setting for the whether it's dark mode or light mode, and default to dark mode or dark mode or light mode when your app starts. Really, really, really useful and fantastic stuff. There you go. And finally, and I'm brutally over time, I want to show the OneForm app. What this does is there's a capability that's not used very much. Okay, this uses the taskbar component. When I run my app, I've had to customize this slightly so it shows up on my screen. If you see down here, this is my application. Can you see that preview of the app showing? Now, not all apps will do that. Oh, actually, I suppose, yeah, okay, maybe I'm wrong. I thought a lot of them didn't support it, but basically, if I go into there, you'll see that up comes a preview of the app. Okay, and this is true even if I minimize it, and you'll see some buttons there as well. Now, I changed the color of these buttons. The default example actually uses dark gray color, which doesn't show up on my dark mode theme, but you can see these buttons just about, I think. And if I add some text in here like this, now when I preview on here and click this button, message from button 1, this could just be, and there is an example for this, play buttons for a media app. But it could also be if you're clocking time, for example, a time and attendance program or task managing app. It could be an on task, off task, or clock out for lunch, or some other thing like send message I'm leaving or something like that. Very, very useful. It does support a thing called an overlay as well. So if I click on here, you can't really see it, but there is an overlay of that icon on the button. Again, I'm using dark mode and I haven't really got time to change the theme, but you can overlay the button with something. So for example, if there was some colors happening, then you could have that. Now, this little feature here is quite cool. See where it says progress? Look down at my icon here, and as I drag this along, can you see the green happening? So if you're doing an update or something like that, and you want to show the progress of your file copy, or you're downloading all Beatles songs from the internet, or whatever it is that you're doing, then you can use that. Error just means this color. Ooh, something bad is happening. Oh yes. And I think the other one's pause, yes, which is yellow, I think. Yes, there you go, yellow. Great little component, very easy to use, and the actual, code behind it, once my screen reorganizes itself, is fairly straightforward. So we just have a track bar there, and that's all you do. Just change the taskbar progress value. It's really as simple as that. I could not make it easier to add some very, very cool functionality there for your Windows 10 app. You may not have known about it before, but if you did, then, well, It doesn't hurt to recap these things. And before we go, the final thing is a notification project. And again, this is a sample, T notifications. So we're going to run the app, and the notification center is here. Now, I have to turn off focus assist, otherwise these won't show. But if I click on here, you can see this notification. If I say this one, show another, then it will show number 2. And I can click on cancel, and it cancel number 2, cancel number 1. If I click it twice, you'll notice it will show twice, but actually when I go into here, I've only got the number 1s because I clicked on cancel another. If I click on cancel, I think it deletes both of them. No, it doesn't. My mistake. But anyway, there's a couple of little caveats that I didn't quite understand with this. Oh, by the way, if you click on here and then click on here, you can actually get an answer back into your application from the notification. Very, very cool feature, very, very Windows 10-y, shall we say. There are some caveats. If you try and use this in a service, which I did a little while ago, it's not very service friendly. You can do it, but you actually need to do some extra code and things like that, and some multi-threading that doesn't work very well, and all sorts of horrible things. But anyway, that's your notification center app. Okay, well, all the slides and any other resources that I can think of will be available by the time this webinar goes out at github.com. Check digits and then that very long number there. But we're going to post these links out. The easiest thing to do is actually follow me on GitHub. I'm fairly active on GitHub. I do help out with a couple of little open source projects and things like that. Most of my repos are private, but if you look for Check Digits, that's me. I'm also called Check Digits on Twitter, but due to some horrible nasty spammer many years ago, Check Digits is not available. Their account is suspended, so nothing to do with me. But follow me on Twitter at Punctuation, and I'll be happy to chat to you on Twitter. Various other things, or you can email me at ian.barker@gmail.com. Okay, thanks very much, and I'll hand you back to Jim for questions if we've got time.
Thanks, Ian, for the webinar. A lot of good content in there. If people want to stick around, we can certainly try and answer a few of these questions here, as long as people want to stick around for that. Are you still there, Ian?
Yes, I am indeed. I correctly unmuted my microphone. Always a plus.
So there's a few questions about C++. Most of this should apply to C++, but there are some differences, but you didn't really get into that. But you look like someone's pointing out some other options here for that. You got into signing. A question came up about what happens if the app is signed and then gets modified.
Yeah, the answer is the whole point of code signing is to stop that happening. There's two things about that. First of all, when you run an application under protected systems like Windows 10 and started with Vista, but I can't remember exactly, but certainly the later server operating systems, if your code isn't signed and you try and run the application, you get a warning, and most of us are probably familiar with that now, which basically says this is from an unknown publisher. Signing stops that message coming up, and you get a much prettier blue message saying it's from a known publisher. And what that does is a little bit more complicated than that, because it also makes sure that the integrity of the app is there. If you try and modify the app, the certificate breaks. I've never actually tried it myself, so I'm not sure if you get some weird message that says it's changed since it was signed, but I know that is one of the features of it. So yeah. Code signing, it's designed to make sure that what you're running is the real thing.
Yeah, you mentioned the importance of 64-bit, that some organizations won't let you run non-64-bit code. It's even more common that places won't let you run an application that is not code signed. So if you are distributing code, distributing applications, especially publicly, really need to get a certificate and be signing your applications.
Actually, there's another caveat to that as well. If you don't code sign your applications, some applications get put into Windows jail, I suppose you'd like to call it, and it prevents them from being able to do certain things. Some things can only be accessed via a signed app. So code signing your app has got all sorts of benefits. It's not that expensive, and it's not that difficult to do. I code sign all of my code now. And
what was the company you recommended?
K Software, ksoftware.org. The link is actually in the chat if people scroll up. But yeah, I mean, the only reason I recommend them is because I personally use them, so I know what they're like. I'll try and get the link again and put it in. Sorry about that scratching noise. That's my dog, as usual. He wants to put in an appearance when he's not allowed to.
I heard the birds a couple times in there too, but it wasn't bad.
Yes, we've only got 15 of them.
Oh my goodness.
We started with 2. My tip, don't put a male and a female together, ever. Otherwise, you'll end up with 15. Anyway, there's the link there, ksoftware.net. Great company, very economical. I don't know them. I don't get any kickbacks from them or anything like that. But they provide Komodo certificates, so they are a big, Komodo's a big organisation. I'll let my dog in, so maybe he'll stop scratching.
Yeah, so there, Thomas said that you should also code sign any installs that can be downloaded from your website. Yes, absolutely. I am surprised how often I download programs from companies that are not signing it, and Windows makes it. It really is like, whoa, hold on, don't do this, and it tries to talk you out of it. And they're getting more. Windows is getting more and more, or Microsoft is getting more and more strict about this. And I know on Mac OS, if you download an application that is not signed, you have to really go through the motions to get it to work. And I expect that Microsoft do that too, because one of the reasons they do that is to prevent people from running arbitrary things that are malicious.
And well, in fact, the Apple's name for that is notarization of an app, and it's basically just code signing under a different name.
Yeah. But it has to be notarized. Apple has to be in the chain is the difference.
Correct. Yeah. It's an additional step. And Microsoft did at one point sort of suggest that they would be doing that as well, but that doesn't seem to have materialized. I think they backed off a bit from being as strict as Apple. They certainly dropped their prices. It used to be the same price for getting into the Microsoft App Store. That's not the case now. It's $19 for Americans and similar. Yeah. Your version, and you only pay that once, whereas with Apple you pay it every year, so it's a lot more expensive.
Which is nice. It's annoying to have to pay that every year, but the thing that always gets me is that it seems to always expire right when I need it.
Oh yeah, and certificates expiring. I do enterprise apps, and those certificates, when they expire, all of a sudden I've got someone phoning me up saying this is expired and I need it fixed now, and it's never seemed to get warned in time. It's always my fault as well, even though it's Apple's.
Yeah. I'm sure there is I got an email somewhere, but I don't know about you, but I cannot get through my email. So Pat's asking, is there a way to make live tiles for the Windows 10 applications?
I actually don't know the answer to that. I did think about doing some live tiles. I believe there is, but I don't know off the top of my head. I'll try and find it out and probably post that on the repo. I'm going to put some kind of Q&A on there and some suggestions for links as well. At the moment, the README's got nothing in there, and they're mainly the slides. But I will actually update the README on that GitHub repo with some links to some of these things. So I'll make a note of that question about live tiles. It can be done. I've seen it done. I just don't know off the top of my head how to do it.
Yeah, I know there was a thing built in a while back, like in Windows 7, but then Microsoft broke it with an update. And I'm not sure if it's still there or not, because I'm not sure if it got fixed or what happened with that. But I believe there are ways to do it, because one of the things it requires is that your Windows 10 application is in an AppX and goes through a couple other little steps. And then once it does that, then you qualify as a UWP app. And once you qualify as a UWP app, then you can access WinRT, which then lets you do things like that. So there are some steps involved to get access to all of those features. But once you, I know Marco talked about this at one point, and I think we have another webinar later this week on, or next week on WinRT specifics. But once you do that, you're able to get access to more APIs, and that's what you need to do if you want to, for example, do the share contract or be a receiver on the share contract. Especially, you have to be like a strong name signing or something like that. I don't remember the details, but there are some steps involved. But that would be cool. I wasn't sure the answer to that either, so I was hoping you knew.
No, sadly not. I mean, it's come up. I've been asked before. Someone wanted to put some stuff in the live tile. It was more relevant in the days of Windows 8. If you recall, it used to be that Windows 8 would start with a whole tile full of screens rather than the desktop. And then they had a sudden change of heart, Microsoft, and said, "Oh, we won't do it that way because everybody's freaking out." And so they went back to just having the desktop, and everybody breathed a sigh of relief. Hey, it's the Windows we're used to. And I think live tiles are much more fashionable at that point. Now, there are some apps that use live tiles, but it doesn't seem to be quite a done thing. Whether they'll phase it out or not, I don't know. But
I find I disable most of mine.
yeah, and the Insider previews still support it because I'm part of the Windows Insider program, and the latest versions of Windows still have those on there. So. They're not going away anytime soon, so it's probably worth looking at.
So this webinar was on Windows. This series is actually on Windows 10. There's a question here about this. There was a webinar just the other day, a couple weeks ago, on the what's new in general, and there's an updated roadmap. Let me see if I can grab the roadmap real quick that talks about the Android 64 and macOS 64. macOS 64 was just released in 10.3.3, is that right?
I believe. Yes, it was. Yeah, 10.3.3.
Okay. I never can remember the version number. Sometimes I say the wrong version number, and people are like, that's not out yet. And I'm like, oh.
We're probably both in trouble now. We probably said a number we shouldn't.
Whatever version was just released a couple weeks ago is the version that has macOS 64. And Android 64, there was an extension that was provided. If you go to community.idera.com/developer tools, you can find the blogs there, and let me find.
Actually, it's 10.3.2. I think was the Mac OS 64.
Oh yeah, 10.3.2. Yep.
Yeah.
10.3.3 is not out yet. Thank you, Matt.
Yeah. Yeah, I told you we're both in trouble now.
So yeah, there is a I believe there's a sign up to get on the beta. Let's see. Here's the roadmap, and I think the sign up's on here.
Yeah, it's a public beta. It's as long as you sign the NDA to not give too much of an advantage to people who want to still the march on the good things that are being done in Delphi. Then
I think one of the big reasons for the NDA on the beta, because I was wondering about that too, is part of the problem is that is to make it explicitly clear that things change as well.
Correct, yeah. And there are some legal ramifications for Embarcadero as well, because if you announce something as a feature and that then goes out into the public eye, there are implications with things like shares and legal ramifications to do with pre-announcement of features that affect share prices. So it's a very, very big convoluted set of rules that just got absolutely nothing to do with saying, no, you can't talk about it, you want to keep it secret. It's not as simple as that.
Yeah, exactly. And things change. Sometimes there's the other thing that's really important is that there can be bugs during the beta, which we're all software developers, and so we know that happens. But they don't want people to talk about the bugs publicly, because that does not look good. Because they're if they get fixed during the beta or features get removed or whatever like that. So that's a big part of it as well for the NDA part of it. But because update subscription, it's a public beta now that anybody that's an update subscription can apply to join the beta and is welcome to do so. All right, well, I think I got through most of the questions, and unless there's something you saw that I missed, I put a link in to watch Marco's fantastic webinar from yesterday on demand, if someone was asking about that. And
I think we hit everything. That's good.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Ian, for this great webinar, and look forward to seeing you again later.
No problem, Jim. Have fun, and goodbye, everybody, and thanks for sticking it out into the webinar. And use Delphi. It's my secret superpower. I keep telling people this all the time.